The chime of the bell beckons us into a sacred time. Good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston, where we widen love's circle by honoring the inherent worth and dignity of all. We extend a heartfelt and inclusive invitation for you to join us in meaningful worship and in service to the world. Today, we are delighted to welcome to the pulpit the Reverend Dr. Becky Edmiston Lang, the Minister Emerita of Emerson Unitarian Universalist Church here in Houston. She served the Emerson Church for 21 years, 17 of them as co-minister with her late husband, Mark. She's an avid gardener, wannabe birder, and aspiring writer of poetry and fiction. Becky married a high school sweetheart in May. Congratulations. Mask wearing in the sanctuary is currently optional, but you are encouraged to continue to wear yours if you are more comfortable doing so. We hope everyone, especially newcomers, will join us in Channing Hall, which is right through those doors, after the service for coffee and conversation. Now, please turn in your teal hymnals to hymn number 1000. It's the very first one in the book. Morning has come. Rise in body and or in spirit and join together as we sing.
Deep in ourselves resides the religious impulse. Out of the passion of our clay it rises, giving shape to our call for love and justice, giving form to our gratitude and praise. It quickens our hearts in the presence of beauty and softens our souls in the presence of pain, ever urging us on to that which is good and moral and true. That is what brings us together this morning. Come, let us worship and let us rejoice in the life we share.
Celebremos compartiendo nuestras vidas, encendiendo esta luz.
Good Good morning. Join me in saying our congregational covenant, which can be found in our order of service. Love is the spirit of our congregation. Service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek truth in love, and to encourage one another. Thus do we covenant.
I get wings to fly. Oh, I'm alive. Yeah. Ooh. When you call on me, when I hear you breathe, I get wings to fly. I feel that I'm alive. When you look at me, I can touch the sky. I know that I'm alive. Oh, whoa, when you bless this day, I just drift away. All my worries die. I'm glad that I'm alive. You set my heart on fire, filled me with love, made me float on clouds above. Yeah, I couldn't get much higher. My spirit takes flight, 'cause I'm when you reach for me, when I hear you breathe, I get wings to fly. I feel that I'm alive. When you reach for me, raising spirits high, God knows that I'll be the one standing by, through good and through trying times. And it's only begun. I can't wait for the rest of my life. When you call on me, oh, when you reach for me, oh, I get wings to fly. I know that I'm alive. When you bless the day, I just drift away. All my worries die. I know that I'm alive. Oh, I get wings to fly. God knows that I'm alive.
Thank you. Thank you both. Wonderful. Good morning. How are you all this morning? Maybe a little bit less hot and humid than the last week or so. We're supposed to get a tiny bit of a break, I think. Maybe a little shower or two over the next week. Thank you for being here this morning. I have a story for you from Ray Bradbury's book, Dandelion Wine. When Douglas crossed the lawn that morning and broke a spider web with his face, he knew that this day was going to be different. His father drove him and his brother Tom out to the woods in the country to pick foxgrapes and wild strawberries. As he drove, his father talked about how some days were good for tasting and some days were good for smelling. But this day was good for both. Taste those orchards, boys. Smell the rain. Well, Douglas looked out of the car and he didn't see any apple trees and there weren't any clouds in the sky. So how could it taste like orchards and smell like rain? But the fact remained, there was something special about this day. When they got to the country, they piled out of the car with blue tin pails and walked into the woods looking for berries. They walked single file, Father very tall, Douglas in Father's shadow, and Tom in Douglas's shade. Their dad said, "Look for bees, boys. Bees hang around grapes the way boys hang around kitchens." And they came to a top of the hill, and Dad looked down and he said, "Look down there, boys. That's where the summer winds live." Well, Douglas looked down the hill, but he didn't see anything. They walked on, and Dad said, "Feel this forest floor. 1,000,000 years of leaves made this soil." And Tom said, "Yeah, I know what you mean. I can walk like a cat and not make a sound." Well, Douglas, he felt the floor beneath his feet, but didn't feel any different than it ever had. But then he sensed something. He thought maybe there was something out there watching them in the forest. Something following along after them. They walked on and Dad said, "Look up there, boys. That's the finest lace you'll ever see. See how the trees are woven into the sky and the sky is woven into the trees. Green and blue woven lace. And the silence, you can hear pollen falling." Well, Douglas looked up and he just saw trees and sky, and the silence, it was silent. But then he felt it again. There was something out there, something watching them. What was it? "Don't talk," Douglas thought. "You'll scare it away." But just at that moment, Tom spotted foxgrapes and with a yell dove into picking, and Tom's yell shattered the spell. They picked for a long time, and then with half-full pails, they sat down on a moss-covered log to eat their lunch. Dad took a bite of his sandwich and mused over it. You know, a sandwich outdoors isn't a sandwich anymore. You ever notice that? Tastes different somehow. Tastes like mint and pine sap. Tom chewed loudly and said, "No, just what you mean, Dad." Doug, he rolled his tongue over his bite of bread and ham. It was just a sandwich. But then he felt it again. The something was close now. It was so close he could almost reach out and touch it. And it was big. Geez, it was big. But somehow Douglas knew it wasn't going to hurt them. Tom's lips were moving a mile a minute. He was chattering away. Know how many baseball games I've played? 1,568. I've brushed my teeth 15,000 times, washed my hands 6,000. I've eaten 800 apples, 600 peaches, and 200 pears. I'm not real big on pears, but you name a thing, and I've got the statistic. Well, Doug stared at Tom. He wanted Tom to shut up. He was afraid that if Tom just kept chattering like that, he was going to scare this something away. But the more that Tom chattered and the more that Douglas stared at Tom, the closer the something came. Whatever it wasn't afraid of Tom. Tom was part of it. And then Douglas couldn't stand it anymore, and he jumped on Tom, and he rolled him off the log, and they rolled and they tumbled the way that kids will do, not really wrestling, just enjoying the press of bodies. And they rolled and they tumbled, and the something crashed over them and swept them along the forest floor. And they rolled and they tumbled, and the something was right there with them, carrying them along. And they rolled and they tumbled and they rolled and they tumbled for what seemed like a very long time until finally, exhausted, they came to a stop. And Douglas, who'd had his eyes squeezed shut, slowly, afraid that he wouldn't see anything, opened his eyes, and absolutely everything was there. The world, like a giant eyeball, stared back at him. And all of a sudden, he knew what that something was that had leapt upon him to stay and would never run away. I'm alive, he thought. And his fingers trembled and his toes trembled, and he could feel his body from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. He could feel each of the 10,000 hairs on his head growing. He could smell the wind and taste the air. His breath raked over his teeth like fire. And he could hear his heart beating, and he could feel his heart beating. He could feel it beating in each ear and beating in his throat and throbbing in his wrist and pounding in his chest. 1,000,000 pores on his body opened. I'm really alive, he thought. I never knew it before, or if I did, I'd forgotten it. And he shouted it to himself a dozen times. I'm alive! I'm alive! I'm alive! And then Tom said, Doug, you okay? And Douglas squeezed his eyes shut again, and he said, Tom, does everybody in the world know they're alive? And Tom said, heck yeah. And Douglas said, oh, I hope they do. I sure hope they do. Dandelion wine.
And now it is our time for our children, the young ones, not the older children, to go off to religious education. But before you do that, that story that Reverend Becky just told just makes me feel alive. I hope it did to you as well. Can everyone, children of all ages, can you say, I'm alive? One more time, I'm alive. And now we are going to sing our children off. Please join together. As you go, may joy surround you. As you go, go in peace. Know our love is with you always.
invite you now to join with me in the spirit of meditation or prayer. Spirit within all, mysterious force giving shape to life, help us to reawaken to the miracle that we exist, that there is something rather than nothing, to the miracle that life arose upon this earth. Help us to see that we are part of all that is, part of that same spirit that turns scales into feathers and bird song into speech. Help us to see that we are in every moment surrounded by a diverse multitude, worthy of our wonder and awe, worthy of our gratitude and praise. And may that awareness fill us with love for this holy creation, so that we might live out our calling to bless the world and each other with our care. Amen. We pause now together to lift up those things that bring us joy and those things which bring us sorrow, those things that sit heavy or sit light upon our heart. Our hearts go out to Tony Holland this morning. Tony's father, David Hoven, died recently. We send our loving support to Tony during a difficult time. Let us now say aloud or bring to mind others whom we wish to be held by the loving embrace of this religious community. Even if we do not know their names, let us hold them in our hearts, for we are all bound together in the fabric of humanity. Here, amid this beloved community, we hear these names, and we hold them in the spirit of hope, compassion, and love. In that same spirit, I invite you each now to enter into a time of silent prayer, meditation, or reflection.
guide us through our journey. This is my prayer. This is my prayer. This is my prayer.
Each week, our morning offering is shared with an organization that shares our Unitarian Universalist values and through which we may live out our principles in the world. This week, that organization is the Texas Unitarian Universalist Justice Ministry, or Texas UJM. Texas UJM educates and organizes Texas UU's member congregations and partners to advocate effectively for public policies that reflect our Unitarian Universalist principles. I hope you kept up with how busy they were during this past legislative session. This morning, to tell us about the work of Texas UJM is church member Dale Story, board member of Texas UJM.
Good morning. Thank you, Rick. I'm very pleased to stand before you this morning to represent Texas UJM in our shared plate offering. Reverend Cooper called me on Wednesday. We were on vacation and said we were having the shared plate offering this morning for Texas UJM. I first thought, oh my gosh, we're on vacation. Then I remembered we're coming back Saturday, and I said, yes, I will be here. I want to be here and talk about Texas UJM. And I was especially pleased when I realized who our guest preacher was. She said I could call her Becky, with her past history at Emerson. She and her husband were very critical in the simple creation of Texas UJM and its growth over the over the decades. It has come to encompass over 36 congregations, ranging the far reaches of the state. It is one of the 5 most critical members of the state action networks across the country. I was listening to a Texas Impact podcast with Representative James Talarico of Austin when I was on the plane coming back. As both a person of faith and a potential political actor, he's been in the state legislature for over 5 years. He emphasized that there was a false dichotomy often between those of us who act and those of us who pray. I don't particularly like that word, but you know what I'm referring to. But he said that was clearly improper distinction, that he believed that there was a union of both of those, that our prayers, our principles, our inspirations were the things that caused us to act. And that immediately reminded me of Texas UJM. Texas UJM acts for us, number one, in the public square, and number two, using our principles and our inspirations to motivate us to try to affect policies. Currently, Texas UJM is involved in several spiritual and educational trainings. I want to plug an immediate event that's coming up in August. It's a transgender inclusion in congregations, in UU congregations. We'll be advertising that some more over the next month, and I'll hope you look at that. It'll be online. There'll be no cost, and I think you'll find it very inspirational. And just last month, they held a eighth principal Zoom meeting that included 135 members. Not everyone had access to that information, but they were able to reach online lots of UU members from across the state. The weekly action hours, albeit on vacation this next month, provide opportunities for, again, members online across the state to invoke all sorts of advocacy efforts, writing letters to the editor, sending out petitions, phoning right there while we're online, legislators or state officials, writing emails and the like. The calendar of Texas UJM, as it were, sort of works in cycles, even years and odd years. The even years, whether it's presidential years or midterm elections, are really focused on UU the vote, which this church is very familiar with and has been very involved with. And Texas UUM has been a major contributor to all of that. The postcards, of which this church did some 5,000 postcards, that was initially created and subsidized by Texas UUM. And the 2022 Texas UUM was really involved in many of the phone banks, text banking, and along with TMO, the canvassing and the like that we had done. And in the odd years, the state legislature, as you well know, meets. And that's very active for Texas UUM. Rick mentioned how involved many members of this church and Texas UUM members across the state. As you're going out, if you look at the bulletin board, I seldom do, but glance at the bulletin board, and one of the blurbs is a picture, the headlines, Transgender Actions by Texas UUM and Partners in Austin, and it's a picture of the Texas UUM, over 100 members there in the rotunda, including over a dozen members of this church. And the spiritual aspect enters into that as well. If you were in the Capitol, this last session, and I think many sessions prior to this, it's been just escalating, could strike you as a very evil place, a very, very frightening place. But we always had a community. We had safe rooms. We had rallies. One of the most inspirational things, we met in the outdoor rotunda, they call it, and were led in indigenous chants and so forth. And that's the soul-bringing part of it all. To sort of try to bring it home to conclude, two specific events I always like to cite of kind of actions and effective actions. We don't say we accomplished this, but we play a part in it. One was, I don't know if you're familiar with Melissa Lucio, a woman accused of and found guilty of murdering her infant child, falsely accused, falsely convicted. But a number of people across the country, but really focused here, and with Texas UUM taking the lead, lobbied very hard publicly and with the Board of Pardons and even the governor's office. And ultimately, she was removed from death row and has been provided a new and I think will be fair trial, and we predict she will be found innocent. Another case I always like to cite, there were a Chinese father and son in Tacoma, Washington, immigrants who are coming to this country seeking asylum. And they are in detention and about to be deported, but the attorney there reached out to UUSC, the UU Service Committee nationally, who reached out to Texas UUM, who reached out to some folks here in Houston, who were able to get them released from detention, bonded out, flown to Houston, and reunited with their families here, and now are involved in the asylum process. So a number of excellent actions, long-term, short-term, spiritual, very politically oriented, are due and accomplished by Texas UUM. I appreciate your support for our state action agency, Texas UUM. Thank you very much.
Those in our sanctuary will find instructions for text giving in your order of service, and those watching the live stream will see the instructions on your screen. Our regular Sunday morning offering collection invites us to weave a tapestry of love and action. We ask you to give generously. An offering will now be gratefully received.
invite you to read along the offering dedication with me. To the work of this church, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action, we dedicate our lives and these our offerings.
Please open your gray hymnals, that's the Singing the Living Tradition, to number 530, and join me in a responsive reading. I'll be saying the regular text, and you'll be saying the text in italics. It is entitled, Out of the Stars. Out of the stars in their flight, out of the dust of eternity, here have we come, stardust and sunlight, mingling through time and through space.
Out of the stars have we come, up from time. Out of the stars have we come.
Time out of time, before time, in the vastness of space, Earth spun to orbit the sun. Earth with the thunder of mountains newborn, the boiling of seas. Mystery hidden in mystery, back through all time. Mystery rising from rocks in the storm and the sea.
Out of the stars, rising from rocks and the sea, kindled by sunlight on earth, arose life.
Ponder this thing in your heart. Ponder with awe. Out of the sea to the land, out of the shallows came ferns. Ponder this thing in your heart, life up from sea, eyes to behold, throats to sing, mates to love. This is the wonder of time. This is the marvel of space. Out of the stars swung the earth. Life upon earth rose to love.
This is the marvel of life, rising to sea and to know. Out of your heart, cry wonder, sing that we live.
Here ends the responsive reading.
Please open your hymnals to number 298. That's the gray ones. To 298. Wake now, my senses. Rise in body and or in spirit and join together as we sing. Wake now, my senses, and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of being in all.
As I said, the story I'm Alive comes from Ray Bradbury's novel Dandelion Wine. It is a magical, mystical novel about one summer in the lives of 12-year-old Douglas Spaulding and his brother Tom, younger brother Tom, growing up in a small town in Ohio. On the day of that story, Douglas was seized by the realization that he was alive and that everything else in the world around him was also alive. From that moment forward, the world opened up to him as a grand theater for curiosity and exploration. And he became determined never to take for granted the fact that he was alive, and never to forget that moment of illumination by the miracle of being. I first read Dandelion Wine more than 40 years ago. I've returned to it many times. It has remained a favorite of mine because it captures that primary sense of ontological wonder, that staggering realization that overtakes us from time to time that there is no necessary reason for the existence of the world or for anything in it. As the theologian Paul Tillich said, viewed from the standpoint of the possibility of non-being, being is a mystery. Just the fact that we are is a marvel. The fact that any life at all exists on this planet is cause for astonishment. Or as Walt Whitman put it, a mouse is miracle enough to stagger sextillions of infidels. Now, many of us, most of us, I would bargain, have had or could have epiphanous experiences like Douglas's. I remember similar episodes from my childhood, roaming free through forest and over field when I felt as if my boundaries dissolved and I was overtaken by a sense of rapture and of being one with everything that was around me. Such sensations, though rarer now, I confess, come to me still. But such epiphanies don't just happen in response to the natural world. A man I know equated Douglas's experience to his own, hearing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony for the first time. He said he felt grabbed and throttled by the gods. Such was the extent of joy that overcame him, that music like that existed. One of my women friends relates a time as a teenager when she visited an exhibit of the post-impressionist painter Cézanne and was thunderstruck by the realization that absolutely everything is composed of the very same building blocks of matter. As she described it, it was as if she were suddenly able to look through the exterior of things and even people to see the underlying dynamic atomic structure. She was agape and agog at how all those atoms managed to cohere. And what a miracle it is that everything doesn't just fly apart. Of course, you might expect great art to stimulate such ecstatic experience, if anything were. But I would argue that a sense of ontological wonder, astonishment at the fact of being, is at the heart not only of art and religion, but also of philosophy and even science. Certainly there have been great philosophers and scientists who possess the sense that life in all its diverse and manifold variations is a wondrous miracle. Albert Einstein wrote, "The most beautiful thing that we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and all science. The person who can no longer pause to wonder and stand wrapped in awe is as good as dead." Even the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, whose work gave rise to logical positivism, said humanity has to reawaken to wonder. That the world exists is mystical. Contrary to what some people seem to believe, greater knowledge of the world need not destroy mystery, but can rather deepen an appreciation for the miracle of it all. Even things whose causality is well understood can still evoke wonder. The process of human conception and gestation, for example, can be fully explained. But to witness the birth of a child, that can evoke as great a sense of the miraculous for modern human beings as it did for earlier people whose understanding of the process was far from complete. Indeed, sometimes the more we learn about something, the more we find to marvel at. Take, for example, something as simple as the dirt in your garden. Consider, a single grain of sand can hold up to 100,000 microorganisms, like bacteria, fungi, nematodes, and protozoa, all of which are necessary to make your garden grow. And the clay in your garden, which that sand helps to leaven, clay is so intricately structured, it has a phenomenal amount of surface area with which to attract and hold on to other molecules. That's why it sticks like crazy to your shovel when wet. But that same quality, scientists now think, might also explain how organic molecules were able to coalesce nearly 4 billion years ago to create the first life on Earth. Imagine that. We may owe it all to clay. And the monarch butterfly feeding at the milkweed plant in your garden, the milkweed plant which you planted just to invite such a visitation. Well, perhaps you know that individual monarchs have to fly up to 3,000 miles in their annual migration south. 3,000 miles. Now, how is it possible that a gossamer creature like a butterfly can fly that far? While the return journey north can take as many as 5 generations to complete. How does each generation know where to fly? Does knowing these facts about the monarch make their existence any less of a marvel, of a mystery, of a miracle upon mystery? Oh, but I can hear some of you thinking, I think it myself. How can I be waxing ecstatic about awe and wonder when there is so much misery and suffering in this world? Doesn't the prescription to revel in the miracle of being sound indifferent to the unjust and tragic elements of life? A luxury of those who need for naught a first world indulgence. Those are questions that I have wrestled with repeatedly throughout my life and ministry. How do we celebrate life when there is so much suffering and pain? And I always come back to something I heard from a theology professor when I was a doctoral student. This professor was a Catholic priest, and he had spent several years working and living with poor farmers in El Salvador during that country's brutal civil war. During one of our classes, a fellow student lamented how it was impossible to celebrate life if you were conscious of all the suffering in the world. The professor stopped him and said, "Do not be so arrogant as to confuse pity for compassion or to equate dispossession with despair." The professor went on to say that he had never known people more in love with life, more attuned to the wonders of nature, or quicker to a party than the people he had served in El Salvador. And he said that to his mind, you cannot do justice work unless you insist upon everyone's full capacity for joy and celebration, including one's own. My professor's admonition has stayed with me all these many long years. And I have come to believe that the capacity to experience wonder may be a necessary prelude to the ability to experience horror at injustice. For if there is nothing that is wonderful, nothing which is inviolable or sacred in principle, then there is nothing upon which to base our ethics. A poem by Jack Gilbert called A Brief for the Defense puts it this way: sorrow everywhere, slaughter everywhere. If babies aren't starving someplace, they're starving somewhere else. But we enjoy our lives because that's what God wants. Otherwise, the mornings before summer dawn would not be made so fine. The Bengal tiger would not be fashioned so miraculously well. The poor women at the fountain are laughing together between the suffering they have known and the suffering in their future. There is laughter every day in the terrible streets of Calcutta, and the women laugh in the cages in Bombay. If we deny our happiness, resist our satisfaction, we lessen the importance of their deprivation. We must risk delight, enjoyment. We must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. To make injustice the only measure of our attention is to praise the devil. We must admit there will be music despite everything. We cannot, of course we cannot, nor should we ignore the tragic elements of life. But neither can we defer celebration until we reach utopia either. Indeed, the longer I live, the more convinced I have become that an enduring capacity for compassion and a sustainable impetus for justice must spring from and be fed by a radical appreciation for the miracle of being. For is it not precisely our exaltation at the ontological mystery of creation that moves us to extend creation's bounty to all? Astonishment at existence, the marvel at the fact that we are, the wonder that there is something rather than nothing, the mystery that everything that is derives from the very same source. Astonishment at existence, and the gratitude that follows upon such astonishment's heels. That, I believe, is what compels us to reach out, to care, and to use our gifts to bless the world. May it be so.
I invite you to open your gray hymnals to number 203. All creatures of the earth and sky, please rise in body and or in spirit and join together as we sing. All creatures of the earth and sky, come kindred, lift your voices high. Alleluia, alleluia. Bright burning sun with golden beam, soft shining moon with silver gleam. Alleluia, alleluia.
Please join me with the words that are printed in your order of service and on the laminated cards in front of you to extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Deep in ourselves resides the religious impulse, Out of the passion of our clay it rises. It quickens our heart in the presence of beauty, softens our souls in the presence of pain. It calls us to love and to justice, as well as to gratitude and praise, urging us on to that which is good and joyous and true. That is what has brought us together this day. May it sustain us in the days ahead. Go in peace. Amen and blessed be.
Thank you so much for watching our service today. We're glad you're part of our online community, where we welcome people who are diverse in faith, ethnicity, history, as well as gender identity and sexual orientation. There are many different ways you can get involved in our community. One you can do right now is by clicking like below or subscribing to our channel. If you're interested in joining our congregation, please email us at membership@firstuuhouston.org. Thanks so much for joining us.